This week, I am very excited because this week, I get to talk about supply and demand. Up until this point, be it the discussion of the division of labor, or how to estimate value, or how money came about, we've operated under a base assumption that in general, things remain constant. If someone who has the resources wants to make jerky, then he will make it and he will sell it at a price appropriate to cover his costs. But all of these concepts have consistently begged the question, what if despite market research telling him his neighbors want jerky, no one ends up buying it? Or opposite, what if someone really wants jerky but nobody's making it? Fact, we still live in the real world, and these things happen. Now, we get to talk about it. So really quick reminder, Smith says that ultimately all value can be estimated in labor, but the more manufactured something is, the further removed it is from the original labor and from the original production, the more it will be broken down into three components being wages, profit, and rent. In this week's chapter, he's going to take those three components and discuss what kinds of forces cause their market price, i.e. the price eventually paid for them at the market, to be either above or below their natural price. Spoiler alert, these forces are supply and demand. Now, for the rest of the chapter, every time we say natural price, we are referring to the natural cost of bringing it to market. Every step of the process included. So if I'm talking about the natural price of bread, I'm talking about the wages, profit, and rent of the wheat, plus the wages, profit, and rent of the miller, plus the wages, profit, and rent of the baker, plus, of course, the wages, profit, and rent of the person who actually physically brings it from the baker to the marketplace to sell. And when a commodity is being sold at that price, it is considered being sold at its natural price. Now, whatever the merchant actually ends up selling that commodity for, be it above, below, or equal to its natural price, is what we are going to call its market price. Whatever the market price is will be dictated not by its natural price, but by the proportion between the amount of it brought to market and the amount of people at the market that want to buy it. Before we get started, it's important to differentiate between absolute demand and effectual demand. Absolute demand is the real demand for an item. Effectual demand is demand that is powerful enough to bring it to the marketplace. So I have a serious demand for a new cell phone, but I can't actually afford one, which means that my demand will never be effectual in bringing an extra cell phone to the market for me to buy. So in the future, unless otherwise specified, when we are talking about demand, we are talking about effectual demand. All right, to cover the basics, I'm going to go with a simple, straightforward example. So let's say we have a market that consists of 10 people, and each of them wants and can afford a banana. The natural price of banana is $1. If I bring 10 bananas to market, I can sell each of them for $1 and then break even. Remember, of course, that breaking even includes my profit margin. But what if I can only get my hands on 5 bananas? That means that 5 people in the market are actually not going to get any. But which 5 people? Smith says the answer to that question resolves itself in a bidding war. Demanders who want it more are going to offer to pay more. Now, I've brought 5 bananas to market. Their natural price is still $1 a piece, but the people who want it more are going to offer to pay $2 each, meaning the market price is above the natural price. How far above the natural price? This is going to be decided by the consumer's motivation and need. How much money do they have, and how much are they willing to give up for a banana? Okay, now let's reverse that. I still have 10 people in my market, but this time I brought 15 bananas. If I sold each banana for its natural price of $1, I would still be $5 short and have an extra 5 bananas on my hands. I have to be willing to reduce the cost of those extra 5 bananas so that I can make back some of my money. But what actually happens is that reduction gets averaged out across the whole supply, so that from the get-go, the market price is below the natural price. How far this price sinks will depend very largely on the amount of excess in the market and how fast the supplier feels the need to get rid of it. So that's the main idea. When demand exceeds supply, prices rise above their natural cost. And when supply exceeds demand, prices will sink below their natural cost. So now our market is still 10 people, but let's say this time I bring 10 bananas. I could be very sorely tempted to raise the price a little bit above the natural cost to increase my profit margin. 10 people are still going to want bananas, but it might make very little difference to them, $1 or $1.50. And this is where competition comes in. I want them to buy from me, not from the stall across the way. So I'm going to continue to reduce my price lower than the person across from me, and he will consequently do the same until we reach their natural price. Any lower and it's just not worth it. Smith argues that no matter what happens, all market prices will eventually gravitate towards natural prices because it's in everyone's interest to make sure that supply and demand consistently meet. Whether it's happening here at the local market where they're selling bread or all the way back the chain where they grow the wheat, everybody's constantly going to try to make sure that they are supplying enough to meet the demand. At every step of the process, if there is a higher demand, people will start making more because their profit margin is larger. But then when they've made too much, the demand goes down and the prices sink, which means they'll stop making it. So that's how supply and demand essentially work, and that's how they influence market prices. But what influences supply and demand? There are lots of forces that contribute to this. Some of them natural, some of them not so natural. A devastating hurricane in Latin America can severely raise the price of coffee all over the world. Smith talks about public mournings as eliminating the demand for colored fabrics and raising the demand for black fabrics. which affects even in our days. We don't have public mournings anymore, but when 9/11 happened, demand for red, white, and blue themed paraphernalia rose significantly. And also there's an issue of not being able to physically meet effectual demand. Because let's say that you need a certain type of soil to make a certain type of wine that everybody wants, but that soil can only be found in a very specific place. So it doesn't really matter what the effectual demand is. Fact of the matter is, you just can't produce that much. On top of that, any other factor that bars other competition from entering the market keeps prices artificially above natural cost. A very common way for this to happen is by traders and manufacturers keeping secrets from each other. But being secrets, they usually aren't kept for long, and somebody who may have thought they tapped into a single market will be very soon discovered by somebody else who wants to do the same thing and get in on their market share. But sometimes it isn't a secret. Actually, most often it's going to be government-enforced policies that keep a limited number of people as the suppliers, and therefore prices high. Or even democratic governments enforce very heavy licensing in some industries, and that keeps the pool of people who are supplying whatever the commodity or service is very, very small, which keeps prices high. Which is why actually most democratic countries have a policy against monopolies existing in the market. And that's where Smith stops. He says that, at the moment, that's all he has to say about market price variation. And now he's going to turn his attention to the variation in the natural prices of his three components, which are wages, profit, and rent. If you're interested in hearing about the rest of the book, feel free to subscribe. If you have any questions or comments about anything I've said up until this point, or maybe something I'm going to say in the future, comments below. See you next week.